Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Future Will Punch You in the Face. It will punch all of us in the face, and I'll just try to stand here. I cannot see anything. I cannot see all of you, or any of you, for that matter. So as you've heard, my name is Máriusz Bari. In certain secluded parts of the internet, I'm better known as Damage. I've been researching and living the cyberpunk subculture for almost about 2 decades now. And I'll be your host for the upcoming short time to talk to you about Ghost in the Shell, one of the most fundamental science fiction franchises of all time. And the reason why this is a very crucial thing to talk about at the Brain Bar Budapest is not only because it's a kick-ass anime, and we all know it is, but also because it is the piece of fiction that comes closest to actually well portraying our future. It is holistic, it is progressive, it is realistic, and it is to the point. But before we get into details, let me just get the obvious stuff out of the way. How many of you actually know the source material? Hands up, please. How many of you have seen or read the stuff? Okay, I love you guys. Thank you. Those of you who actually are not familiar with the source material, or you might just need a recap, let me just guide you through it quickly. Ghost in the Shell is a futuristic cop story. It was first serialized in manga form, that's the Japanese comics, in 1989 by Masamune Shirow. And then it was later adapted to the big screen by 1995 by Mamoru Oshii. And these are 2 names to remember because those Japanese artists are well linked to very futuristic, very evocative pieces of work such as Avalon, such as Appleseed or Real Drive. So please do indulge in these when you do have the time. And it is actually, Ghost in the Shell is a bloody hydra. It's got loads of different series, different movies, comics, and books connected to it. So it's got a vat full of good background material. Does this work? This does not work. Okay, I will continue. Okay, it does work. Wonderful. Okay, what you can see there is the majority of the protagonists. It is Ghost in the Shell, to give you the premise. It's a story about a group of intelligence agency experts trying to track down a super criminal in the future, 2030. So this is not really a very special thing to start with. The trick comes when it turns out that this whole story takes place in Japan. Now, this turns a very global, very over-the-boundaries sort of cyberpunk story into a very introspective, very peculiar story with loads of subtle references. Japanese cyberpunk is nothing like European or American cyberpunk. First of all, if you don't know European existentialist Cartesian philosophy, you're probably missing out on 50% of the stuff. And unfortunately, I'm not kidding. And then let me give you another example, which is more interesting. Japanese cyberpunk has a lot to do with physicality. When it deals with bodies, it's very gritty, it's very oil, it's very brutal. It's like going out to the gym on a Friday night or going to an electronic body music party in the 1980s in Belgium, because that was a thing. Compared to that, when Japanese cyberpunk deals with information, it's very subtle. It's nothing like the information superhighway that we came to love in the roaring 90s. It's water, it is ocean, it is something you delve into. And the deeper you delve, the more subtle, the more reclusive patterns do emerge from the big data. And the representation just says it. Here's one example. Here's another one, which actually looks pretty much like flying and not swimming, but you get the general idea. It does have references to Neuromancer when William Gibson actually gave a great example on how to do spatial infographics in terms of bandwidth in a city. And obviously, this went on to user interface designers as well. This is Project Daedalus. And that's actually, as far as I know, it represents darknet attacks globally. So there you go. If I don't tell you that, you probably think it was an image from the movies or the series, and you would probably be halfway right. So there you go, Japanese cyberpunk. And the tricky thing comes when it turns out that this huge super criminal that Section 9 is trying to get a hold of is not a human, it's not a person, it's not even a cat, it's an artificial intelligence. And the weird thing is that it wasn't born from under the fingers of programmers in a loft or anywhere else where coders do work, but it was born out of a sea of information. So there you go, theories of emergence. And this AI wants to fulfill a higher evolutionary imperative by wanting to diversify itself, to better itself, which is another fancy way of saying it wants to have sex without a body. So there you go. And this obviously leads to hardcore questions of philosophy, psychology, ontology, religion. And this is usually the point where most of the people go stumble out to the kitchen for another bottle of wine. And yeah, probably. And the function, the gadget that actually makes this as functional as possible is portrayed right there. It's the Denno, it's the cyber brain, which is the heart of the operation, really. And this is a very tricky thing. It's a plug-in, plug-out system. You know, there are Ghost in the Shell is the English translation of the movie. Ghosts refer to the soul, to the consciousness. It's actually a reference to Arthur Koestler's work, Ghost in the Machine. So there you go. There's another Hungarian reference for you. And the shell refers to the bodies themselves. And that's actually a very, very fundamental point where things go totally haywire and bad, crazy in the movie. But I'm not going to spoil everything for you. Just to say the least about this, Ghost in the Shell does portray, as I said, it works holistically. It does portray the bad things evenly with the good. And people in 2030 do have cyberbrain sclerosis, for example, when the brain tissue hardens just enough to make their life terrible. It is obviously something that both politicians and the medical community tries to cover up, as they usually do. And then there's also a very tricky thing where they have something called the closed shell syndrome. And the closed shell syndrome is pretty much similar to a very not good situation. Let me give you an example. You're standing outside near the bar, because that's a good place to hang out at. And there's 1,000 people talking to you at the same time, all vying for your attention. I'm basically giving you a verbal illustration of the internet today at 2016. You're filtering this thing out as good as possible, but there's got to be a coping mechanism for it. And the closed shell syndrome is one way of coping with it, because the sources say that it's a psychological barrier the subconscious constructs for the ego in order to avoid or elude the connective nature of the internet. So, you know, there's that. Also, it would be important to note other... Oh, yes, these are the shells. And this is also one of the most key moments or key scenes of the film, where you can actually see how shells are constructed in the factories. And the music is also amazing as well by Kenji Kawai. Just to give you one more example, that's thermoptic camouflage there, which is basically the cloak of invisibility for you RPG players out there. This is basically putting everyone available in the visible spectrum and thermal, and thermal imaging as well, invisible. The University of Tokyo is also working on this, and as you can see, it's very similar to putting webcams behind your back and projecting that image to your T-shirt, which is, in theory, a very good thing. In terms of military use, well, we still have a few moments to work on that just now. But this little, actually sort of cute creature over there is one of the most fundamental and very exemplary example. Now, you know that this is really important now. It's called the Fuchikoma, or the Tachikoma, or the Logikoma, really depending on which series or which movies you're looking at. This is strong AI over there. This is the sort of strong AI that has free will developing on its own inside that casket there. And this is actually a pretty good reference to autonomous offense and defense systems. I believe that being in the Future of Wars panel, you might have already heard, or you will hear stories about how the drone wars are progressing and what sort of frameworks they're using. This is a very good reference to something called the ethical architecture, which is basically the ethical framework that you give to drones about who to kill and who to leave alive. They don't do anything. They are comic relief. And they also do lengthy philosophical discourse about the meaning of life and about deep learning, how to be more philosophical, and also how to prepare your guns better. So there's also that. And obviously, I have to note, referring back to one thing that I said earlier, that how close to life, how close to our current society Ghost in the Shell is. Well, that might not have been completely true, as Ghost in the Shell, the fictional universe, is over, or more like beyond, 4 world wars. There's nuclear fallout on most of the planet. And there's also one very tricky piece of technology that Japan used in order to handle fallout. But then again, the Japanese nation is actually one of the most intact countries in that world that is still available for working out diplomatic issues and whatnot. And oh yes, this is the Laughing Man. I promise you I won't talk too much about the 2017 Ghost in the Shell movie, because that is also coming up, featuring Scarlett Johansson, and a huge problem with whitewashing. If you're still outside and you want to have a coffee, I'm pretty much okay talking about that, not on stage. But just to stop rambling and give you something that you could take home from here, let me just wrap up everything with talking a bit about science fiction. I believe if you are here, you're probably in love with science fiction. If not, you just damn love it. And either way, you probably know that science fiction is not about the future. It's about the present. It's an extrapolation of the present into the future. It is about the present mindset. Most writers do not have the mental capacity, unfortunately, to consider everything, to talk about propelling themselves into the future, 20, 30, or 200 years. What sort of social, linguistic, or everyday life related impact technology is going to have on the life of the everyday people or the very special people. And still, I, for one, am a very firm believer in one thing, in that we really have to vie for one thing. We have to try and understand the level of freedom technology gives us, and not only because it liberates and empowers us, but also because many have jumped off the cliff before into the pit with Candy Crush on their phones, because that's the actual level of technology they can cope with. And, you know, that's nothing wrong with that, but still, one of the major roles of education, and I do like to put science fiction in here as well, is to show people how much technology can help us and to make a better future. And in order to do that, we need blueprints. Blueprints that are not simplistic, but blueprints that are holistic, that can show us how certain technological developments can cascade into a flurry array of novelties. And in order to have that, we have to have science fiction, because that is the platform and that is the medium through which we get blueprints that can motivate us and inspire us, and inspire the developers, the artists, the startup kids, the transhumanist grinders, the media fixers, all you lot, all of us. And as Neuromancer was a very powerful piece of inspiration and blueprint in the 80s, Ghost in the Shell is an equally powerful and strong piece of blueprint in the 90s. But the reason why we still talk about these things in 2016 at Brain Bar Budapest is because these are the pieces of work and pieces of art that portray and illustrate the greatest unanswered questions that we face in this bottleneck zeitgeist. And mind you, we've been in this bottleneck period for over something like half a decade. And we all know these questions. What does it mean to be human? Or how powerful can we let an AI become? Or what do we do to police them, if we have to police them at all? And what happens to us? What happens to everyday life? What happens to our bodies, our sexual life, our mental life, our religious life, when we meld machines into our bodies, and when we can change perception around us with memory implants or artificial or virtual or simulated realities? How can we verify what's real, or how do we define real? And before I would turn into Morpheus on this stage at this point, I'll let you go peacefully. At this point, please do endorse these science fiction movies and books I've talked about. And I'll let you go with placing the right to answer these questions for a better future. Thank you.